What if the person who sold Joe wasn't a CIA operative, a senator, or someone secretly hiding inside the Lioness program? What if the leak came from the one person Joe would never think to suspect? Her husband. At first, that theory sounds almost impossible. Why would the man closest to Joe betray her? But that's exactly what makes it so interesting. In a story built around intelligence operations, the safest place for sensitive information isn't always inside a secure facility. Sometimes the most dangerous security breach is much closer to home. Joe's husband doesn't need to know every classified detail of her missions. He only needs to know enough about her routines, her fears, her contacts, and the people around her to become an incredibly valuable source of information. And if someone has been quietly exploiting that access, Joe could have been compromised long before she realized she was in danger. Here's the first reason this theory deserves attention. A mole doesn't necessarily need official access to classified systems. They just need access to someone who does. Joe's husband has something that many intelligence officers don't have: proximity. He sees the person behind the operative. He knows when Joe is stressed. He may notice when something important is happening, even if she never explains the details. He can recognize changes in her schedule. He knows when she's preparing to leave. He may notice when certain names, phone calls, or situations make her uncomfortable. On their own, those details might seem harmless. But intelligence isn't always about stealing classified documents. Sometimes it's about collecting patterns. Imagine someone watching Joe's life from the outside. They may not know where she's going, but suddenly Joe starts preparing for a trip. Her behavior changes. Her schedule becomes unpredictable. She receives calls at unusual times. She's distracted. She's worried. And then she disappears. Now imagine someone close to Joe quietly feeding those patterns to another person. Over time, those pieces begin to form a picture. The enemy doesn't need Joe's mission files. They can start predicting her. And that may be the real meaning behind the idea that Joe was sold. Perhaps nobody hacked the CIA. Perhaps nobody broke into the Lioness program. Perhaps the leak came through information that nobody even considered classified. Why Joe would never suspect him? This is where the theory becomes even darker. Joe's entire career is built around suspicion. She knows how dangerous people can be. She understands manipulation. She spends her life trying to identify threats before they strike. But everyone has a blind spot. And Joe's biggest blind spot could be her own home. If the leak came from another CIA operative, Joe would investigate them. If it came from a politician, she would question their motives. If it came from inside the Lioness program, she would start looking for inconsistencies. But would she investigate her husband? Probably not. And that's what makes him the perfect theoretical suspect. The best mole isn't always the person nobody knows. Sometimes, it's the person everyone trusts. Was he betraying Joe intentionally? But here's where this theory could become much more complicated. What if Joe's husband didn't even realize he was being used? Maybe he isn't the mole. Maybe he's the source. There is a huge difference. Someone could approach him without revealing their true intentions. They could ask innocent questions. They could become a friend. They could slowly collect information over months or even years. A casual conversation about Joe's travel schedule. A comment about her being away. A question about whether she's working another dangerous assignment. Individually, none of this sounds important. But put together, those details could become intelligence. And suddenly, Joe's husband isn't necessarily a traitor. He's an unwitting participant in the operation that compromised her. That would make the reveal even more devastating. Because Joe wouldn't just be forced to deal with betrayal. She would have to confront the possibility that the person closest to her unknowingly helped destroy her. But what if he did know? Of course, there is another possibility. What if he knew exactly what he was doing? That would completely change how we look at Joe's story. Every moment at home would suddenly become suspicious. Every conversation. Every question. Every time Joe thought she was returning to the one place where she could stop being an operative. What if that was never really true? Joe may have spent her entire career protecting the country from threats around the world while the person helping expose her was sitting across the dinner table. And the real tragedy would be that she had the skills to detect almost anyone else. Just not him. Another reason this theory works is because Joe's greatest strength has always been her ability to compartmentalize her life. She has one identity for work, another for her family. She tries to separate the two worlds. But what if Season 3 is showing us that those worlds can no longer stay separate? The enemy may have realized that attacking Joe directly wasn't the best strategy. Going after her family wasn't just about hurting her. It may have been about accessing her. If Joe can't protect the boundary between her personal life and her professional life, then she becomes vulnerable in a way she never expected. And that's why I think the mole reveal could be much bigger than simply identifying one traitor. The real question may be, how long has Joe been compromised? Was it one mission? One phone call? Or has someone been collecting information about her for years? My theory is that Joe's husband is connected to the leak, but not necessarily in the way we expect. He could be the mole. He could be an unwilling source. Or someone else could have been using him to study Joe's movements and predict her operations. And that might be the most dangerous possibility of all. Because Joe could spend the finale searching for an enemy inside the CIA, while the real breach began somewhere she never thought to look. At home. The Lioness program may have been infiltrated. Joe may have been sold. But the biggest twist would be discovering that the person responsible didn't need access to CIA headquarters. They only needed access to Joe. And if this theory is right, the question isn't just who sold Joe. It's whether Joe's closest relationship was ever as safe as she believed. Because sometimes the most dangerous mole isn't hidden in the shadows. Sometimes, they're already sitting at your table,